We have someone who's been continuing his role as culture spokesman, does a great job in the party, also runs the New Culture Forum. It's Peter Whittle. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to be here. It also does feel a bit like an alternate universe because young people involved in politics, fantastic, and I think that really you should congratulate yourself and indeed Jack too as chairman for I think being the only party which is having a growing youth participation. I don't know if you saw the New Statesman article about this, but it was fantastic. So you know, well done to you. Now I've got you on my side. Basically, the reason I've come actually is that I was asked to talk about being British, what's wrong with it. That happens to be the title of a book I wrote. So this isn't just some kind of book selling tour. Actually, I have got some copies, but no one goes without his copies. But they are free, of course, to use. So I've got about 7. So if you're interested, if my speech makes any impact, any interest for you, then please do first come, first serve, and you're welcome to one. But I wrote it a couple of years ago. Now, around around this time, we had this fantastic summer, if you remember. We had the Diamond Jubilee, and we had the Olympics, and there were Union Jacks everywhere. And so being British, what's wrong with it, seemed rather sort of moribund by that point. Everyone seemed to be enjoying being British very much. But unfortunately, this question comes back time and time again. And it goes to the very heart, I think, of what UKIP, what we are as well as a party. Because jubilees and sporting events aside, Britain's become used, I think, to not celebrating itself. If anything, it seems sometimes determined to do itself down, to apologise for itself, to apologise for its history, and the kind of amazing achievements that any other country would celebrate heartily. Now, I'm not going to start going on about terrible young people, but I did experience, one of the reasons I wrote the book, so I experienced a conversation in a branch of Waterstones in London, the bookshop, and there were 2 guys around about 20 behind the counter. We were all waiting to make our purchases. And I just caught the end of this conversation they were having, and the first one said, anyway, it's like a bit of a smart aleck. He said, what has Britain ever given the world? Oh yeah, concentration camps. And his friend said, yeah, really, and they snorted and went on. Now, I was incredibly angry about this, standing there in the queue, but being British, I said nothing. I stayed silent, and I sort of rather regretted that. But you see, they would have been astonished if I'd protested, if I'd sort of challenged them, and if I'd said, well, actually, if I started to go on about parliamentary democracy or the rule of law or the Industrial Revolution or the fact that Britain had virtually shaped the modern world in which they were living. But sadly, the type of attitude that those guys had has been pretty much par for the course for too long in Britain. Self-loathing, I call it. Self-loathing has run through British culture to such an extent, for so long that we no longer see it for what it actually is. We've come to think of it as being the natural way of looking at things. So self-mockery and satire and taking the mick out of ourselves, these things, that's just great, and that's part of British tradition. But that's quite different to what I would call systematic and systemic self-denigration on a cultural level. It's hardly surprising, then, that more and more people ask, why do I feel that I should keep quiet about being proud to be British? Or that they ask, when the question arises, and we've seen this actually very recently, what actually is British culture anyway? Or what are British values? Well, the question that we have to ask is, when did British culture change from one which had a basic pride in itself to one which seems to be one of endless apology, a permanent, what you might call, cultural cringe, and a rejection even of our own history? I say the fact is that it's the result of what's been a sustained cultural onslaught, really, over the past 50 years. One which has come from virtually every side and which has left us at sea about our history and about our identity. And I'm afraid it's down to those people you've heard a lot about recently too, and quite rightly, the elites. Those who set the tone of our national life, who set the terms of debate, and indeed have the sort of power to shape the culture in which we all live. It is the political class, right, whatever party, except for ours, the cultural establishment, the educational establishment, and the state media, such as the BBC, those high up in public life, they've had a powerful hand in shaping the confidence we previously had in ourselves, making this country seem unrecognisable to those who were born here, and indeed unknowable to those who come here now. These elites, many of whose beliefs and attitudes were shaped in the 60s and the 70s, find the whole idea of pride in a nation sort of distasteful, a bit embarrassing. Indeed, they dislike the whole idea of countries actually existing, nation-states, existing as single entities at all. That's why they have an unswerving, blind loyalty to the idea of the EU, and they still do. They think countries are the fountain of all evil and all that's wrong in the world. Our educational establishment, too, has had an especially woeful part to play in undermining British identity. Because over a long period of time, it's being gradually put right now, but over a long period of time, the junking of meaningful chronological history in our schools has resulted in whole generations who've got little idea of the country in which they live, or its history, its traditions, let alone what might have made it great. Now, I would say that a person who doesn't know his past, I've got a much longer past than you have, but a person who doesn't know his own past has no idea really who he is, right? And certainly no sense of how to deal with whatever the future might throw at him. And so it is with the country, you know? An American philosopher, George Santayana, said, "A country without a memory is a country of madmen." Now, the European Union, one, the threat of the breakup of the UK through Scottish independence, and the ingrained policy of public multiculturalism, any one of these issues over the past 50 years taken alone would have had great implications for what it means to be British. But put together, they have constituted a triple whammy. Then there are those amongst us who have, for example, if I take multiculturalism, who have championed the increasingly discredited doctrine. And there were those who had perhaps a genuine belief in it, but I would say naive, a belief that all cultures and all people were one together, and that the world should be borderless, and that Britain should somehow lead the way. They didn't mean badly, but I think that they were naive. But there were also those whose motivation was born of something I think less idealistic. They were slaves to guilt about Britain's imperial past, and they had a distaste for the whole idea, as I said, of nationhood, and British nationhood in particular. British history was something to be disowned and ashamed of. The default position of these people was certainly one of kind of self-loathing. So you could say that, for example, multiculturalism was a very effective way of attacking mainstream culture, while at the same time appearing benevolent and caring. But whatever their motivations, there can be no doubt that, taken together, these strands have had a very, very far-reaching effect. And when you add into the mix the dislike of our establishment, self-dislike, and the rewriting of that history, the only surprise is not why many of us question what's so wrong about being British, but why more of us don't. And yet, you know, I'm piling on the agony here, and there's a big yet. I mentioned 2 years ago, we had this amazing double celebration of the Diamond Jubilee and the Olympics. And the fact is that they were ordinary people who came out. Right? They were the ones who did street parties, they went and cheered the Queen, they took part or whatever in the Olympics. And the fact is that the elites, they don't quite know who these people are. Where have they come from? You know, what are they doing? Why are they cheering? You know, it's not really. We don't quite understand it. Simply don't understand it. National pride, therefore, I'm saying, patriotism, has shown a remarkable capacity, despite this onslaught, for survival amongst ordinary people. A major poll carried out very recently by a left-wing think tank, I might add, showed that 79% of those asked considered themselves proud to be British. That's pretty universal, I say. This is hugely heartening. It shows that whatever attacks might have had to endure, pride in Britain runs very deep. But we cannot be complacent about this. One of the most invigorating and exciting aspects of UKIP, right, is that we tackle head-on what most of the country, outside the Westminster bubble, sees as cultural issues of crucial importance. And we're not afraid to talk about the kind of country we are now, the one we have been, indeed the one we want to be in the future. These are cultural issues of huge importance, and UKIP, we are the only people seriously talking about them. We must teach our remarkable history to our children without shame or embarrassment, and your children will know. And perhaps the time has come for us to take a leaf maybe out of the American book. I would like to see, for example, flags flying or displayed proudly in all our schools. The time has come too to challenge and shrug off the legacy of the 60s and 70s and speak up of the greatness of British achievement and what it has given the world. To do this, we today, 2014, must promote an overarching, unifying British culture, which is open and inclusive to anyone who wishes to join it, anyone who wishes to identify with Britain and British values, regardless of ethnicity or religious background. That is crucial, and that is what we believe as a party. America has a very successful society in this respect because it is multi-ethnic. It's not multicultural. It has an overarching sense of itself and its identity and its culture. That's really, I feel, where we should be heading. A multi-ethnic society that is unified by pride in being British. Your role here is unique. I mentioned the two guys at the top of my speech, you know, they were about 20 or so, university, I think. But it's your generation, I would say, that more than any others, not only has to keep our story alive, but has to contend with that kind of deep-rooted cynicism and negativity, often masquerading as being cool, or somehow as being sophisticated. It really is not, you know. So when those people like my assistants say, well, what has Britain given the world? What are British values, you know? And we've heard a lot about that, particularly in this city recently because of the Trojan horse story, which was actually all about what are British, but suddenly the government wants to promote British values. Suddenly they want to promote them. We hear a lot about British values and British culture. People say, well, what is that culture? You know, what are those values? You must have some answers, you know. It's not enough anymore to sort of say, well, you know, a cup of tea, Mr. Bean, things like Nick Clegg, I think, said. You've got to have proper answers. So I say that you've got to have the courage to come back and not worry about not appearing cool or anything, come back loud and clear. So I thought I would help you out. In the book, there's about 50 reasons why you should be proud to be British. I'm not going to go to them all now, but I thought I'd start a few off, and you've got to help me with one. But first of all, parliamentary democracy. Parliamentary, sovereign democracy. Don't worry about the idiots that we've got there now. They just happen to be inhabiting it. We gave the world the idea of parliamentary democracy. We have the common law. This is extraordinary. The common law evolved over hundreds of years, sensible and flexible, coming in direct conflict all the time, as we now know with the EU. But that is also what we gave the world. The Industrial Revolution, which ushered in the modern age. This is a huge thing, the first country to industrialise. A scientific and technological tradition which virtually built the modern world, and frankly has never been superseded and is unique. Everything from the spinning jenny through to the World Wide Web. Now, these days, the first global language. 6, we've got a belief in equality before the law. A belief in equality before the law and the equal rights of all people, regardless of sex, religion or race. 7, a belief in freedom of speech. You know, we've got to hold that very, very dear here in the UK, because the attacks have been on our speech. Now, we have seen it in one campaign, it's only going to get worse. Freedom of speech is what is enormously important. It's a founding principle of our democracy, and that is a British value. That is a British value. I would add Shakespeare and an unrivaled literary tradition. That's just because I'm an arty-farty type. Right? But you could also add, because we've got the Commonwealth Games going on, virtually all organised sport in the world. That was rather played down at the Olympics, I felt. But that's where it comes from.